Good morning. Good morning. If you can make your way to a seat, we'll start in just a minute.
Okay, everyone, let's come together. We're gonna begin with the prayer, everybody. Good to see everyone this morning. Thank you for making your way here. Great to see everyone this morning. Let's pray. God, we're thankful this morning that you've added to our life. Thank you for your unfailing love for each and every one of us. Thank you, Father, that you love us in a way that we cannot comprehend. And we're grateful for your Spirit. We're grateful this morning to come together as a family to talk about and hear the strengthening of our policies for our children. Thank you for all the incredible people who have served in children's ministry. We're grateful for the hearts of many. We're also grateful that you have a path for our children to fall in love with you. And Father, we also know that you also have a path for our children who have not chosen you. And we pray, Father, that we can continue to pray for them for the rest of their lives. Bless our time this morning in Jesus' name, amen. Welcome this morning. Go ahead and have a seat. A little over a year ago, we met together here on a Saturday morning to address some of the issues that rose up in our, worldwide fellowship, as well as to talk about our children's ministry, the policies. And we want to thank, all the people in our church who have been involved in our policies to have some strong policies over the years. And, I remember Alex and I mean, it was a very sensitive time that morning. Like I've always said, this church has strong opinions about things. And that's good to use our voice. It's good. And we welcome that as a leadership because we believe God's Spirit is always moving to strengthen His church. And so we really appreciate all of the men and women, all the brothers and sisters in our church who have been part of the process. But as a leadership, we wanted to make sure, and we communicated that day, we wanted to make sure that we consult, and have partners that have expertise in this area. And as a leadership, that's what we want to do to help build God's church here. Because, we're not the know-it-all evangelists. We are very aware of our weaknesses, and we are not fearful to ask for help to strengthen God's church. And so we've been really happy that we've taken our time to roll this stuff out, and we are super thankful this morning to have the opportunity to hear how we've strengthened our policies. Okay, so thank you so much. That is the spirit we're trying to build the church on. Right now, Rachel's gonna come up and have an introduction. Okay, thank you.
Well, I just want to let y'all know a little bit about Chandra. Chandra has been providing nonprofit and risk management counsel to religious organizations for 25 years. Her consulting firm, Beene Consulting, LLC, provides guidance to churches and mission societies on pastoral counseling, corporate governance, and risk management. She's licensed to practice law in New York, New Jersey, and Texas, where she also helps churches navigate legal responsibilities and challenges. Having served in the ministry for 10 years, she is able to combine ministry and administrative experience to help her clients achieve their ministry goals while minimizing risks. She and her husband, John, have 4 children and are active members of the Greater Houston Church. And just on a personal level, I'm super excited to have her and John here this weekend. We've known each other for 10 years. We work together in Houston. Tons of great advice has been given by Chandra in multiple situations. She's the lawyer on retainer, and so just able to call her, it gives a great sense of security for our time in Houston, having her there to talk to, but just having her as a friend. Our kids are the same age, and I just respect her so much as a Christian, as a wife, as a mom, and I'm really excited that you guys get to hear from her today. So.
All right. We are really excited. We have enjoyed our time so far with the church here. Thank you so much for making me and John both feel so welcome. My son is back there in the back. He came up to spend time with Bryce, and it's just been a joy. It's been a joy to get to see some of the faces of people that I've talked to over the years. And just in the last, 6-8 months that we've been through this process, working on your youth ministry policies, I've been on Zoom with many of you talking about what you're doing, what you want to see happen, etc. And so to meet you in person is a joy. So thank you for that. I will say just a little bit about the policies. So my plan is to give you kind of an overview of what the revised policies are going to be like. They are still, my understanding, in process. The whole system here, that the way it's happened is I came in, I looked at what you had, I talked to your youth ministry workers, your administrators, some of your ministry staff about just how you're set up, what will work for you, what will not work for you, how you want to see things done, and figuring out the best way to do it. So then we came up with a first draft of those policies, and I think you now have evaluated them with your board, you've sent them to local legal counsel, so they're not quite finalized yet, is my understanding, but you're so close. You're very close. And I think I can tell you in general a lot about what it's going to be like for you, but this is not going to be too specific, okay? Because those things might change a tad here and there. So, youth ministry workers, once those are finalized, they're going to go through a great training about exactly what needs to be done and not done, etc. This is not that, okay? This is more just to inform, have a time you can ask questions, express significant feelings about something, and so forth. After we talk about the policies, I will kind of love to talk about some things that the church really cannot do because, the church only has so much control and power over our lives, but maybe talk a little bit about what parents and members can do on their own so that we can all work together to keep our children safe, okay? Because it really is something that everybody has to do their part. So just so I have an idea, in the room, how many of you work in youth ministry? Okay. How many of you are parents with children in the youth ministry? Okay. And then the rest, I assume, you just want to know everything's going great. Okay. Good to know. Your policies that you had before this whole process started, I will say you had some good policies already. And even beyond that, there were a lot of things that you were doing that weren't formalized in the policies, but you were taking good safety measures. I want you to be reassured of that even though this is kind of a new stage, you were in a situation where people were taking the children's ministry very seriously and working. From everything I was told and shown, people were working to keep the children safe already. What we've done with the policies is we try to formalize what was already happening, tried to clarify some things that maybe were a little ambiguous and make things a little more uniform around your 3 regions. Maybe one region did something really well, another one wasn't paying as much attention. So by putting it in the policies, the goal is to make everything more uniform and consistent. We did try to modify, youth ministry policies, they are not stagnant. Because as your church changes, your policies have to change. One good example is what you call children's ministry versus middle school ministry. The grades, your church may have this explosion where you have so many 6th graders that, okay, we're going to cut off in 5th grade this year. 5th grade stays in children's ministry, 6th grade goes to middle school. But then the next year you have, 3 years later, you have no 7th and 8th graders, and let's pull the 5th graders in. You see what I'm saying? It's like as your church changes, you kind of have to evolve the policies with it. So it's something that you have to look at every few years anyway. So we tried to modify the policies to make it consistent with where you are right now. And there were some things that we did try to improve. Maybe things that hadn't been done. We're like, okay, we need to think about this and how do we want this to happen. So that said, let's talk about what you can expect, okay, as these policies get rolled out. One of the first things that we did in the policies was to clarify the difference between a church activity and a private activity, okay? Church activities are when church policies apply. Private activities are those things that you plan by yourself for your family and your family friends and whatever. The church has no power over that, right? If you want to have a birthday party for your child, you should get to do that the way that you want. And you shouldn't have to worry about what the church, because the church, one, doesn't have the ability to supervise that and enforce those policies, and doesn't really want to. Okay, you don't want them involved in your life to that level. They don't want to be involved in your life to that level. But sometimes, because how much church is our life, it gets a little muddy sometimes to distinguish. So the policies try to clarify, when is this a church activity and when is it not? So a church activity, here is this. There are factors that you look at, because sometimes you have to kind of look at the whole picture. Okay, in general, yes, we're going to say this is a church activity. If it's announced or publicized by the church, it's likely a church activity. If it goes on the church calendar, it's likely a church activity. So if you want to have a birthday party for your child, don't be surprised if they say, we're not going to put that on the calendar, okay? Because we don't want to have to worry about ratios and screening, have your party at home. If you use church staff, church resources like the building, the video equipment, if you're using church stuff and church people, it's likely a church event, okay? Who planned it? Who organized it? If it's your youth workers and your church staff, it's likely church event. How much control does the church have over it? Okay? If it's something that the church has no influence over how it's happening, it's probably private. Okay? But if the church is like, hey, we want to make sure we have this, we want to have a speaker, we want to have a prayer time, or we just want to make this, that sounds like church, right? Because the church is planning it. They're organizing it. They have control. So that's going to be a church activity, and youth ministry policies will apply. Now, small groups, and I forget what you call them here in Seattle, if it's family groups, small groups, Bible talks, but you know what I'm talking about? Okay, those are not church activities, okay? Those are private, because you're picking your location. Whose house are we at this week? What are we going to talk about? And you might be given some guidance. Hey, we want you all to study the book of John this year or something like that. But you're deciding, are we going to bring food? What are we going to do with the kids while we're here? Okay, those are private, and the policy specifically spells that out. And so it's good for me to communicate with you. Those are private. You're responsible for making sure that those are safe, because there's not really a way that the church could supervise those effectively. They don't have a way to control those. And again, you probably don't want them to. You want to have that type of freedom and liberty to set up your group the way you want. So those are private. Now, parents, and I've kind of addressed this, you have the freedom for private activities. You have the freedom to do whatever you want. You don't have to make sure you have screened and approved people. You don't have to follow the policies. Now, one question that always comes up is, but can I invite the teen workers to my kid's birthday party? If they're there, does that automatically transform this into a church event? And typically, no. But if you're asking them to invite everybody, organize it, get the transportation ready, all of that, you've just shifted it. So invite them, make them a part of your life. Let them be in your life, in your private affairs, but they'll be a guest, okay? If it is a church event, you have to follow all the policies. That means, this came up a lot in the conversations about middle school events, because I understand a lot of parents plan a lot of middle school events, but they are announced to the church. They are put on your calendar. And so what that means is you've got to follow the policies. Anytime that you are leaving the children in the care of someone else. Now, if parents show up and you say, hey, we're all going to the pumpkin patch. Was that one of the events? Corn maze. Okay. We're going to the corn maze, but we organized it. We put it on the church calendar, but we are not taking care of your kids. If you want your kids to come, you bring them. You provide the supervision. You decide what they're doing. We're just telling you we're meeting up there, okay? So the church did not take responsibility for the children. The parents are responsible for that, okay? Do you see the distinction? Okay, anytime the children are placed into the care of the church. Yeah. So that was actually a very small part of the policies, but it's really important for you guys because that's probably one of the things that are going to affect you the most, since most of you are not youth ministry workers, is knowing when am I responsible versus when the church is responsible. Now, screening workers. The church was already screening workers before this revision process. We did do a lot of work into being more specific with how that screening was going to happen and how the documentation was going to be kept. So we formalized a lot. We were more specific with details, but the screening process is going to look like this. You have an application. There will be an interview. There will be references that will be checked, and there will be a criminal background screening done by a professional company, okay? All of those will be done for any person working in the youth ministry who has access to children. That's if they're in the teen ministry, middle school ministry, children's ministry, anybody who is working with the children, okay? If you're serving, leading a church event, you have to be screened and approved. So those parents planning a middle school activity, that is a church activity, the people who are chaperoning have to be screened and approved. And that may be a little different for some of you. So that is going to be, if it's a church activity, everybody has to be screened and approved. For teens, that means the youth ministry workers, the mentors, disciplers that are picked by the church, hosts and chaperones of events, same for the middle school. You can invite families to attend events, but the people supervising the minors has to be screened and approved. For drivers, sometimes the church will organize transportation, or sometimes the youth ministry workers will provide transportation. Like, the teen worker picks up your kid and takes them somewhere. They have to be screened as a driver. The church has to make sure that there's a reasonable belief that this is a safe driver. They have to have a license. They have to have auto insurance, and they have to have a reasonably safe driving record. That doesn't mean perfect. If you got a speeding ticket once a couple of years ago, okay. But if you got 3 and one of them was 100 miles per hour, you probably won't get approved as a driver, okay? So anytime the church organizes transportation, I'll talk about that in a minute. So that's screening the workers. Then there's training. We can have really great policies, but they don't do a lot of good, right, if you don't train. And so what the policies require is that there's annual training every year. Now, that, again, won't happen until it's all finalized and the details are set in stone. But the hope is to make it very routine. It'd be great if you can work out a way to make it digital and video training, that they can answer questions afterwards to prove that they did it, so that they could do it over and over again. Makes it very uniform, and you make sure everybody has the same training every time. Spiritual training, it's the same as always. That's ongoing, right? You're teaching the teachers how to use a curriculum. You're teaching teen workers how to work with teens. That stuff, it's ongoing. It's not spelled out in the policies. The policies focus more on the risk management, okay, safety issues. Supervision. So we did screening, training. The next thing is supervision. Those are the three biggies for risk management: selection, training, and supervision. Supervision, most of this is formalizing what you were already doing. Okay? We set out specific ratios, and we wanted to create consistency across the church. So in your children's ministry, there are ratios. If you got X number of kids, you have to have this many adults in the room. Now, the ratios are bare minimums, I believe, and it ranges according to their age. It'll be like 1 to 2 kids for the little bitty ones that you can carry 2 kids out, okay? But once they're walking, it goes up. Once they're in school, I believe it was 10 to 1. Once they're school age, that's bare minimum. You might, in some situations, find that, okay, we have this group of children for whatever, maybe some special needs in the group, or the facility has some special circumstances, we need more supervision. You can always have more workers than the ratio. You just can't go below that. And the policies explain that, but you must have the ratios in the policy as a bare minimum. There is a ratio for teen workers. I believe it's 10 to 1. Don't hold me to that, but I think it was 10 to 1. So technically, you can have one worker with 10 kids. You probably don't usually have that many with just one. You probably usually have 2 workers working at a youth event. So that brings me to the 2-person role. Do any of you know what the 2-person role is? Because you already had it. Yes?
If someone, you can't have one worker alone with a child, there have to be 2 workers if there's a situation where the child's by himself.
Exactly. For the children's ministry and middle school ministry, there has to be 2 adults with the children at all times while they're at a church activity. They cannot be alone with a child. And it can't just be one adult with 6 kids. It has to be 2 screened and approved adults at all times with all the children. That's in the classroom. That's if you take them to the bathroom. There's always 2 adults. That protects the children for obvious reasons. It also protects the adults from any misunderstandings or misperceptions that can happen. There's always another person there. Now, for the teens are allowed to meet one-on-one with teen workers. That a teen worker is allowed to have a Bible study or have a discipling time with a teen. And that is, that is a decision that had to be made. It is commonly how a lot of our churches handle it because we value the effectiveness that we feel like teens have if they can have a mentor and they meet together. So how we try to mitigate that in the policies is we spell out and we'll train the teen workers that, listen, just because you don't have to have another screened and approved adult, you've got to be smart and you should not be in isolated areas. You should not be sitting in a parked car. You should not be in a kid's bedroom with the door closed. You should be in a common area of the house, in a coffee house, in a fast food place. You should be in a public, non-isolated area when you are meeting with a teen. So there doesn't always have to be 2 screened adults every time you have a discipling time, but you should avoid isolated areas. Okay? Any questions about any of that before I move into more supervision? Yes? That's a great question. Well, the good thing is that the ratio is so high with teens. It's not usually an issue because you can have 20 kids for 2 adults. But that is a situation, let's say all of a sudden you had 2 adults, you were expecting 15 kids, and 30 showed up because it's a great day, then I would, hopefully as a teen worker, you kind of know who's already been screened and approved because they're hosting events and chaperoning with you. So you ask, can you stay with me? I need you to stay with me tonight because we have these extra kids. And if that's not working, you call some people and say, I need some more people here. Okay? So we want to live real life. Do we want to turn away kids? No. But you do have to put the effort in and figure it out. Most of the time, you can figure that out. There's usually parents, I'm like, I got too many kids. I need you to stay here. I need you to, or call your wife or somebody. I need support. Okay? Right. And so, again, they're allowed to be alone with the teen. So it's best if there's at least another kid in the car. Is that prohibited? It's not prohibited. And so that is where, and we're going to talk a little bit later about what everybody else can be doing. That is where all of us have to kind of be alert and watching things. Like sitting in a parked car, that should not happen. But driving someone, okay, teen workers are allowed to do that. But if you have a teen and you notice that just seems to happen every week and it seems to take a little longer for them to get home, then there's time to say something and to say, yeah, I'd prefer, let me meet you somewhere. I'll drop off my kid. Or, you know. It is not spelled out in the policy, so no, it's not. But if you see the male teen worker driving a teen girl around alone, please speak up. Please say something, because I don't think anybody really wants that. Am I right, Barrett, Rachel? Yeah. So that should not be happening, but that is not spelled out in the policy. So you're talking about a teen that wants to help with the children's ministry? Okay, I believe we've made junior, yes, okay. So yes, that's allowed. They will be screened. Their screening will look a little different because you can't necessarily get a criminal background check on a minor, but there's references and things like that. They will be counted in the ratio as a child. Okay, so they will not count as one of the adults supervising. They can go in there and they can help, but they are counted in the ratio as a child. So technically, they're not really supervising kids. They're more like a teacher's helper for the policies, but they are screened and they are trained. Okay? Yes. If they're on the calendar, if they're announced by the church, if they're planned by the youth workers, those are church activities. Even if, regardless of where they are, those are youth activities. I would say no if they're not supervising. I mean, honestly, your life will be so much easier if you get all the parents who can be screened. You know, it just, that is less complicated in a lot of ways, but you might have some people that can't be screened. And honestly, you don't want to find that out later. So, so can you have a guest there? Yes. But you would want to be clear who's supervising, okay? Oh, thank you for telling me that. So the question was for campus ministry, not youth ministry. If a small group in campus ministry is a church activity, is it planned by the campus minister? So I would say, yeah. That, well, one, the youth ministry policies aren't applying because you're not supervising minors. Whether or not, I would probably need to talk through the details of that. It's gray. That would be gray.
And then I think some teams do show up to one of those events every week, and so I would guess then the team policies do apply.
Do you invite the teens?
Yes, they are invited.
We should address that in the policy. So that requires some thought. So it's not addressed in the policy right now. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we haven't addressed that yet. Good question. Yeah. Okay, two more and then I'll keep going. Yes, right here. Screening, no. Screening during the criminal background check is not every year. I believe, I can't remember the 3 years. They'll repeat the criminal background check every 3 years. There is an update form to be filled out every year, which is a one-page form, basically saying nothing has changed since you were screened. The training should be annual, but the screening, you get updated annually with a new criminal background check every 3 years. You do not have to do the complete process every 3 years. You don't have to fill out a new application. You don't have to be interviewed again, but they will update the criminal background check every 3 years. Okay? Yes? So the screeners, thank you. I'm sorry, Kiara. So the last question was whether or not the screening needs to be updated every year. And we said no, it'll be criminal background check every 3 years and an update each year. And the last question was, remind me, what is the interview in the screening process? So the screeners will review your application and then they will sit one-on-one and just do an interview. And there should be an interview form that will be created that will have some uniform questions. And yeah, it's a time to ask specific questions and have that one-on-one contact. Okay, and then the references, I believe 2 minimum are required. And then the screener will be calling those references to ask about the applicant and then the criminal background check. Okay. Okay, one more and then we'll move on. Yeah, well, the question is if you as a youth worker are going to an event with older kids like teens and you want to bring your toddler who's not a teen, okay, one, you are responsible for supervising your child there. So you're not releasing them to the care of the church. The policies do not prohibit children of different groups being together. It's just that the policies are different. For example, the ratios are different. So some of your regions may have smaller classes and have, the 2 and 3-year-olds and the first and second graders, everything in one big. You just have to count how many kids in each age group, and do I have enough youth workers for that age, and so you have to do a little math formula. But it's not prohibited from having the kids there. I think in that situation, parents just have to know you're responsible for your toddler. That event was not created for a toddler. It was not planned for a toddler. You didn't give permission for your toddler to participate with the consent forms we're going to talk about. So it's not ideal, but I know in real life, sometimes that's a necessity. So you are responsible for that child. And yeah, okay. So talking about supervision, as we continue on supervision, the sign-in procedures, and this is one of the policies that is different for each age group. Okay, so children's ministry, children have to be signed into class, and you guys, I think, we're doing that in all of your regions. I think the policies made them a little more uniform in how it's going to be done. What the policy requires is that the person who signs the child in is the person that picks them up, or a parent can pick up the child, or a person designated by the parent in advance can pick up the child. Okay? So the goal is you do not release the child to anyone who just comes in over to check out the child. It has to be the parent or the person who dropped them off or a person that was designated by the parent that will pick up the child. Okay? The policies talk about what to do if there's an injury or property damage or if there's a risk of danger to a child. Again, these are things that were probably happening, but we clarified it and formalized it into the policy. If a child is hurt, the parents have to be notified. If you learn that a child is at risk of harm, maybe you have reason to believe that the child is harming themselves or that the child is being abused or there's something that indicates there's a risk of harm. For middle school and teens, that may be mental health issues or finding out the child is engaged in dangerous activities. Parents have to be notified. They have to be told of self-harming, suicidal thoughts, anything that puts a child at risk of harm. Now, parents, this is important. Parents are not going to be told everything that the child confides in a youth worker. And again, this is more relevant probably for the older kids. So, example, if a child talks about their crush and tells the youth worker about the crush, the teen worker does not have to tell the parent, your child is crazy about so-and-so, whether that's opposite sex, same sex, or whatever. You don't have to tell the parent. And the policies encourage confidentiality between the teen and the worker unless there's a risk of harm. Now, engaging in sexual activity, there's risky, dangerous behavior. That would be different. Do you see the distinction? Okay. I don't want parents to think that they're going to be told every time their child tells something super interesting or even concerning. But if there's not a risk of harm, they won't be. Okay. Teen ministry, we're going to talk some specifics about teen ministry because there are more risks with the teen ministry. Children's ministry is honestly a little simple to protect. You've got two adults in the room. They're confined into a classroom. You have them for an hour and a half and you give them back. You don't do, ice skating or, there's less risk for the younger children. Teens, we do have more because we try to be so creative with our teen ministry, which is a very good thing, but our creativity creates risks. The church does encourage teen workers to study the Bible and spend time with teens, okay? And I always try to explain, okay, if we wanted to eliminate all risks, the safest thing to do would be everybody come in here, the kids sit next to their parents and listen to the sermon, and then they go home. You have very little risks there. But we have found that's not very productive, right? That doesn't create what we want for our teens. And so we do these other things to try to help the kids fall in love with God, to fall in love with the church, to see that they can have fun and be spiritual. And so each of those things create risk, and risk is not always what you want to, you don't always want to avoid all risk. You have to decide which ones will we accept and what can we do to mitigate that, to make it as minimal as possible. So these policies are about that. So teen workers are encouraged to spend time with teens and build those relationships. They do need to get permission from the parent to study the Bible with the teen, and they do need to get permission to baptize the teen. Now, sometimes, honestly, in real life, some teens don't even want their parents to know that. Okay, I'm mentoring a teenage girl right now, and just her faith, she wanted to study the Bible, but she was afraid if my parents know that I'm studying the Bible, they're going to get so excited that I'm ready to become a Christian, and I'm not ready to become a Christian. I just said you could tell me stuff about God, but I'm not ready to make a commitment. I don't want to feel that pressure of everybody thinking, oh, she's going to get baptized, and she didn't want that. So the parents knew that I was mentoring their daughter. So I went to the parents. I said, if your child ever says that she wants to study the Bible, if I ever ask your child about studying the Bible and she wants to study the Bible, do I have your permission to study with them? They were like, yes, that would be great. I would love that. I said, all right, great. I have permission, and I didn't have to tell them. She told me yesterday she wants to do this, but I have permission. Now, 6 months in, they're like, has she ever mentioned that she wants to study the Bible? I said, you should ask her that. You should ask her how our times together are going. And she did at that time. She's like, oh, yes, we've been doing that for 6 months. They were like, oh, I had no idea. But you can, for most of us in the church, it's really that simple, okay? Now, I'm going to be really specific. If she wants to get baptized, I'm going to say, are you okay? She wants to get baptized, and her faith should be in a place. Always. And there are some situations, especially if you're studying the Bible with children who are not in the church, whose parents are not in the church, it is a little more complicated. But you still need to get permission from the parents to baptize their teen. Okay? The sleepovers. When I first started working with youth ministry back in the 90s, and they told me about these sleepovers, everything in me was like, really? Do we have to have sleepovers? Can we just not have sleepovers? And almost every church I've ever been in, I'm like, yes, these help us so much. I'm like, okay, I trust your ministers. You know what you're doing. Okay, how can we minimize this? So your policies now address sleepovers. And these are church-organized sleepovers. Okay? You have to have at least 2 screened and approved youth ministry workers there. Even if it's teens, even if there's only 3 girls at the sleepover, you got to have at least 2 adult workers. That's different than the other teen ministry policies, right? But it's a sleepover. And so, got to have at least 2 adults. There can be no adults in the home that are not screened and approved at a sleepover. So if there's a single hosting a sleepover and the roommates are not screened and approved, the roommates can't be there. All adults have to be screened and approved. You do not want to find out after the fact that one of the adults there could not pass the screening. Okay? That means if you have a non-Christian spouse, that's not going to be screened and approved. That house, unless he's willing or she's willing to go someplace else, that house is probably not where you should have a church-organized sleepover. No adults should share beds with minors unless it's your own kid. We're not going to tell you, that's a little different. But if it's not your own kid, no adults share a bed with the minors. There's only a single gender in the building. If it's a cabin or a house, if you're going to have multi-genders, then you have to have 2 separate houses. And then private sleepovers, you're on your own. If your daughter wants to have a sleepover, do your best. Whatever you want to do, but the church is out of that. But if it's a church organized one, if it's on the church calendar, if everybody's looking at it and thinking the teens are doing this week, then those are the rules. Okay, transportation. If it's provided by I think I mentioned this already, but if it's provided by the youth ministry workers, they have to be screened and approved. If the staff or the youth ministry leaders organize the transportation, they can only pick people that are screened and approved as drivers. So that list is usually a lot shorter than the list of screened and approved workers. Okay, you may have 15 parents who are screened and approved and only 2 of them got screened and approved as a driver. So honestly, most of the time it's going to be easier if you organize your own transportation for your child rather than have the youth workers do that. And they would probably be grateful to you for taking care of that. And, everybody has to be in a seatbelt. Don't give your teen worker a hard time if they're like, I can't take one more kid because I only have 3 seatbelts working. I will never forget when we were in New York and we were leading children's ministry or teen ministry, and I just done these trainings on policies, and this teen worker shows up from another ministry at a teen event, pulls up to the park, and I swear it looked like 20 kids got out of that little bitty car. I just sat there like, I cannot believe you did this. And we had to figure out how to get all those kids home. I think we were up in the suburbs, had to get them back to the Bronx or something. I'm like, really? But nobody had cars, so they thought we only have 1 car in our ministry, so let's put everybody in the same one. So the policy says you're not going to do that. Everybody needs to be in a working seatbelt. Okay, consent and release forms. Now that you have formalized policies, you should probably expect to see more permission slips being distributed, because now we're like, okay, this is when we need to do it. So consent and release forms, they do a list of things. 1, you're giving your child permission to attend and participate in the event. You're giving the church permission to get medical help if needed and you can't be reached. You are giving permission for photographs and videos, or if you choose not to, saying that I do not give permission for my child to be in videos or photographs. And, if you're like most churches I've worked with, you have like these end of the year photo slideshows, where you make a video and show all the fun stuff that your kid did or went to camp, and you have all the slideshow of all the things that happened, or social media. But we need permission to put your kid's image on that, so that will be included in the consent and release forms. I know that there are situations, I've seen situations where parents really have legitimate reasons that I have to exclude my child from that. Domestic violence situations where people are trying to hide their location, etc. If you're in a situation like that and you don't want your child included, not only don't give permission on the consent form, but you really need to communicate with the people involved too, because you need to make sure that the people that are there know, my kid can't be in photographs. If you're in that type of situation, hopefully you know to take that care anyway. Yes? So what I recommend, the question is, how do you practically do that? Because you're taking pictures all the time, so do you do it before every event? And so my recommendation is do one big form for the year. And for all your activities, I would list every activity you think you may do in that year. Bible studies, devotionals, pizza parties, movie nights, bowling. I mean, we repeat a lot, right? So we kind of know what we do, and try to imagine every single one you might do in the year and put it on that list. And they can, if they don't want their child to do one, they can mark not this one, or they can say all of them, my child has permission. And then the video and photo release, I would just have it as a blanket photo video release. But it covers everything in the year. And then if you do an event that wasn't on that, then you can do another form for that event, but you shouldn't have to do one every week. But practically we know it's not gonna work, because kids don't even have their parents with them when they get dropped off half the time. And you only need this release form for the activities for the older kids, because children's ministry, they're just in service. You might need the photo video release for the Kingdom kids, I guess, but does that help? I would try to do one a year. I wouldn't do one forever, because that is a weak consent form, but I try to do one for the year. The last thing on these forms is a release of liability, saying that we're not going to sue the church or the volunteers or the directors or whoever for whatever happens. And that's something that we get asked a lot. I've gotten asked a lot from volunteers, because they're like, I'm willing to help. I want to make this great, but what kind of liability am I taking on to work with teens? Am I going to get in trouble? And so this form has clauses in there to protect. Okay, good question. Yes, the getting permission and studying the Bible, you don't have to have written consent. Usually verbal consent is enough for that. But when the teen is baptized, they're going to make a notation in the membership records who gave permission. If the parent baptized the teen, the consent is kind of assumed because you did it. You can't blame anybody else. But if somebody other than the parent is baptizing the teen, then the membership record should indicate who gave permission for the child to get baptized. Okay? Safety team. Now, this is new, I think, to the policies, but it was something that we discussed, given just culture and current events, is that there will be some members of a safety team at every worship service. Not every teen activity, but every worship service. And the safety team's responsibility is just kind of monitoring for safety. We don't call them security guards, because that connotates some skills and experience that maybe they don't have. But, just to be alert and monitoring, watching to see, are there people walking around in the children's ministry area that don't need to be there? Is someone giving a teacher a hard time at sign-in? Or is there someone that's hanging out in the bathrooms that the children are going in and out? Just alertness, awareness, having those eyes. How many will be at the facility will depend on the facility. And so there's discretion at each campus for you to decide how many you need in your building. I've been in buildings like we rented, we used to rent this one building. It was a campus lecture hall, and the children's rooms were classrooms on the second floor, but the bathroom, you had to go down 3 stories into this dungeon-like area to take the kids to the bathroom. And there were people from campus that could just walk freely through the building. It wasn't private to us. So we had a lot of safety team people there. If you're in a building like this, where it's all kind of confined in one area, maybe one person may be enough to cover everything. So you have to look at your facility and your circumstances and figuring out what is necessary for us to make this safe. Okay? We did add a provision to the policies for if you have a situation with special needs child that needs professional assistance in order to be in the class, and that professional wouldn't be a member of the church. And those are very rare. I don't know of any situation. I wasn't told that you have that situation here, but it's something I've done for other ministries, and I asked, do you want me to put that in there for you so if it ever comes up, you know how to handle it? So it's in there. Just how you will allow someone and what steps you will take to protect the children if you need that type of thing for a special needs child. The last section is probably the longest part of the policies, is child abuse reporting. So if this requires annual training like everything else, but especially in this area, you've got to train the youth workers every year and make sure that they remember what to do. The policies explain what is child abuse, to look for signs of child abuse, the need to report child abuse, who is required to report child abuse, the fact that everybody is allowed to report child abuse, and it explains what to do. If the child's in immediate danger, you call 911. If there's internal reporting required and there's external reporting required, okay? Internal, you would tell the coordinator of whatever group you're in, children's ministry, middle school, or teen, you would tell the coordinator and they would tell the senior minister staff person. And external, there's mandatory reporters in Washington, which is a list of professionals. And my understanding, and I'm not licensed to practice in Washington, so they have local counsel looking at it, but my understanding, most of our youth workers would not be a mandatory reporter, but if a supervisor in the youth ministry learns that a child in the youth ministry was abused in the youth ministry, that person is a mandatory reporter. It seems to be some fine details. Any person is allowed to report child abuse, okay? You have immunity if you report child abuse. They encourage it. Everything is set up to let everybody wave a red signal saying, help this child, okay? It's just there's a list of people who are required by law to do it, and that does not include all of you. If the staff, though, receives an internal report that someone believes a child has been abused or neglected, then they will confirm if an external report was already made, and if it was not made, they will determine is a mandatory reporter involved that needs to report this, and if a mandatory reporter is not involved, does the safety of a child require that we report this? Okay? So those are determinations that the senior minister will have to make. The church's response, if there's a reason to believe a child's been abused, is first to make sure the child's not in immediate danger. That would be the 911 call. But also, if anyone is accused of abuse or neglect, that person is immediately removed from youth ministry. Before an investigation, before any determination of truth or if it really happened or not, that person is automatically taken out while everything is figured out, okay? Anybody that's accused is removed. You let the civil authorities will do their investigation before the church does one, and that is deliberate, because if the church started investigating before civil authorities could, you can mess up the investigation. And we're not equipped to interview child victims. We're not equipped to interview that type of situation. So you might feel a little urgency as why is the church not doing more, but they have to wait until the civil authorities can do what they're doing, because you do not want to interfere with that and inadvertently shift some witness statements or shape anything. You just don't want to do that. You got to and so it will take time before the church can do anything beyond take a person out of the youth ministry. You have to wait for the experts to do their thing. If the civil authorities investigate, after that, then the church will have steps to take. If they've come to a finding, let's say if they find that the person is guilty of child abuse, well, that's okay. That person will never be in the youth ministry, and we have to determine, is there something else that needs to be done if they attend church? If there's not a finding of guilt, either they're found not guilty or they're not prosecuted or whatever, then the church may have to do their own investigation, because that doesn't always mean innocent. That doesn't always mean that there was no abuse, and so the church will have to figure out how to go forward from there. Okay. Any questions there? Yes. Oh, okay. That was a stretch. That was really the bulk of all of the policies. It's not every detail in the policies, but the things that are probably most relevant to you. So, yes. So the question is whether or not, if a teen is talking about same-sex attractions, is it possible that the teen workers can talk to the parents about that issue, because that is part of what is going on in that child's life. And my guess is, shouldn't the parent, you're thinking, why wouldn't the parent want to know, which obviously I'm a parent, yes, we want to know. The policies do not require that. I will say that. The policies do not require that you inform parents of the sins or temptations or, attractions that your child is experiencing. Now, in spiritual training, can the teen worker encourage the child to talk to the parent? Yes. Can the teen worker get permission from the child to talk to the parent? We really try to, I don't know if we do this. That's my habit. Okay. This may be more ministry question than risk management and how they want to handle it. The policies encourage confidentiality, just like they would for an adult. That they build trust and let them know we're going to protect your confidences and not reveal your confidences. The only time the policies address it is if there's a risk of harm. So the policies do not address it beyond that. What your ministry may decide to do and how they train is differently. In the ministries I've been in, we've encouraged children to talk to the parents, try to equip the children to talk to the parents. Sometimes that takes time. But that's the way the ministries I've been in have experienced it. How your ministry is going to handle it, I'll let them deal with that. Does that help?
Yes. And also when you say risk of harm, would alcohol and...
Yes. Drug and alcohol abuse is dangerous behaviors, illegal behaviors. Yes. And I would say sexual activity would be a dangerous behavior for a minor. Yes. I'm sorry, 1 second. That last question was whether or not drug and alcohol abuse would be considered risky behavior. So, yes, back there. So you're asking practically, once the policies are adopted, will everything freeze until everybody's trained and the transition happens? No one has talked to me about that. I don't think that that's necessary to halt. I think that they've probably already started trying to implement some of these things in anticipation of the policies, because they're not prohibited by the policies. So I don't see a reason that you have to halt. I would expect the implementation period to be planned out, and because it's going to take time to get all the documentation up to par and everything like that. So I would expect that it doesn't halt, that there's a transition period and a goal of when let's get us up to policy by this time. Our screening will be compliant by this time, etc. Let me just ask, am I right? Yeah. Okay. We did spell that out in the policies. I don't have them in front of me. I believe one is at least one in the church, and if you have experience working with children, those would be excellent references. Your spouse or mother would not be a great reference, but I believe at least one in the church is required. I may be wrong, but I think that's what we decided. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about the record-keeping requirements? I am grateful I'm not a teacher, but I have small record-keeping for the church, and I don't know what it is, a real mess to deal with pieces of paper and so forth. So what is the responsibility of the church to just want to archive it basically?
Right. The question is, how are the records going to be maintained? And the policies are actually very specific about what records are required, and they have to be kept in real life almost forever in these situations, because the statute of limitations is almost permanent in real life, practically permanent. So the policies do spell all that out. I strongly encourage electronic records, have an online digital application, have your interview form digital and they can type in the responses. Any paper documents be scanned, and the criminal background check will be electronic. So yes, Barrett.
We'll have our youth ministry administrator keep those as password protected files. So that's the plan for that.
So the more electronic, the better, because you don't lose them as easily. They're more retrievable, and you don't end up with moldy, rat-eaten stuff in a storage unit somewhere. So. What's that? All right, more questions? Okay. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about, so that's an overview of the policies. What you can be doing, since the church cannot guarantee everything will always be safe. You only have so much power, right? Somebody can lie in their interview, maybe never got arrested so they don't have a criminal background check, and seem perfect on the face and still be evil for all we know. This in real life. So parents, having everybody working together, parents and non-parents, just members, alert and aware and invested in making church a safe place is so important, because there is only so much a church can do. So some things that you could do is, one, please support the church in enforcing these policies, even when it's going to be inconvenient. And I get it. I am a mom of 4, and I write the policies, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I just wish we could, because life would be easy. But so please be supportive. If you go to pick up a child and they're like, oh, wait, you weren't designated as someone who could pick up the child, don't give them a hard time. Just, they're doing what they can to make this safe. So please be supportive. Please understand if a teen worker tells you, I can't do that. I can't babysit. I can't be your babysitter while you go out of town and stay with your child. That the teen worker is not going to be your overnight chaperone. And be solution oriented. You know, if things get complicated, okay, let's figure out how to make this work. What can we do? How can we make this practical and workable? And, you know, policies can, if you find out that we created this policy that sounds like a really great idea, but in real life it just doesn't work, they can be changed. Okay, it is not the end of the world. It can be changed. I would just say have a good reason if you're taking on more risk, and make sure everybody knows we've decided the risk is worth the benefit of us doing it differently. And you know, you go to your ministers and they go to the board and you'll figure it out. The biggest thing you could do is go ahead and get screened. If you want to help, get screened so that you can be there and help make these great events, and we don't have to worry about, are we sure we have enough hosts that, oh my goodness, what a great thing, 10 extra people showed up. So we need as many people to be screened and approved as possible and trained. And mostly be alert. And I don't want to incite paranoia. You know, when I started working for the church back in the 90s and I started looking at all these situations and stuff, honestly, I thought if I ever have kids, I don't know what I'm going to do. I may never have a babysitter in my life. And, you know, I don't want to incite paranoia. The truth is, it's the scary situations are not most situations. But they're evil enough that we want to be aware of Satan's schemes. Satan is not super creative. He kind of does the same thing over and over again, right? He has a few scripts, and he uses those scripts over and over again. So be aware and be alert. And there are some, if you read the situations that happen in youth ministries across the world, not just in our fellowship, but all over, you know, it's sleepovers, it's car rides, and it's digital communications are the things that you hear over and over again. The text messaging, the private messaging, the overnight things, and private times sitting in cars. Those are problems that Satan loves, those scripts. And so be aware and conscious and watching. If you notice that there's a teacher alone in the Kingdom Kids classroom, like this happens to me all the time. Somebody forgot, and one of the teachers runs out to get something, and they left one teacher alone in the Kingdom Kids. I just kind of stand by the door, and I don't make a big deal. I don't like, hey, you should, well, I have done that, but I shouldn't do that. You should have another person, that you don't have to make it a crisis. But I help, and I just stand there, and I'm like, oh, where'd so-and-so go? Okay. Yeah, I'll hang out here with you until they get back. You know, I got your back. You know, be supportive, but be alert and aware. And that did two things. One, it complied with the policy and helped them out, but it also reminded them, oh, we have to think about that she can't just run out to get the communion cups or whatever that they did. Okay? So yes, point it out in a helpful way, not a judgmental crisis, sky is falling way. If you have a teen, pay attention to how the teen worker is spending time with your kid. Most of the time it's going to be fine. Most of the time it's going to be great. But if you start noticing they seem to have a lot of time one-on-one, and I'd rather they be in a coffee shop or something. You can please talk to the team worker and say, I'd rather you meet in a public place. I'd rather you do this. You speak up, and you can also talk to the ministers and say, I've just noticed this, and it may be nothing, but it made me a little uncomfortable. You know, I talk to the team worker first, because that's respectful, right? But also, if you see something that makes you uncomfortable at all, say something. That was a big thing. New York City is see something, say something. You know, if you see something, say something. It doesn't have to be a judgment. It doesn't have to be a condemnation, and you don't have to make an accusation. I just want to point out this. I saw this. It made me feel a little, I don't know. So maybe you guys just want to check on it. okay? That way we're all working together as a team. If you're a parent and you know this, you've heard this a million times, we have to monitor our kids' communications. You know, whether or not you let kids privately message adults, that's a judgment call that you make with your kids. You know your kids, you know how confident or assertive they are or are not, and the vulnerability, you know your kids. And so, but monitor. Like, my kids hate it, but I'm constantly grabbing the phone like, oh, what you saying? And, not always too thrilled. But, okay, nothing beats keeping open conversations with your kids. Nothing beats that. Keep in an environment where you can talk with your kids and and you're realizing they are coming to you about difficult conversations, about difficult things. I mean, that feels great when your kid is coming and telling you something that they're a little afraid to tell you, but they tell you. It's like, oh, okay, then I'm doing something right. And really work hard to have those, to create safe places with our kids. We didn't talk, the policies talk about curfews. They're not spelled out in the policies because it changes for each of your communities. But if you start noticing that the teen workers have the kids out late at night, usually there's a curfew in place, a curfew law in your community. You don't want the kids getting stopped at 11:30 at night by the police because they're out after curfew. So if you notice they're out a little late, say something, okay? And maybe say, I'd really feel more comfortable. Maybe we need to pick up our kids if you're going to be out that late. Be wise. Now, all of this has been youth ministry activities, church activities. We'll talk about those small groups are not church activities, remember? But still be smart because you are responsible for those, right? That one comes back on you. So be smart. Notice a lot of times, depending on some small groups, the kids participate in the discussion. Some, they have them in a separate room. Notice if you have a big disparity in age, if you have a bunch of teenagers and then 2 or 3, like 3 and 4-year-olds, that's a big gap. It might be fine, but it might be beneficial to have an adult up there, Sometimes, teenagers can babysit, but not every teenager should babysit. And so, just be aware that a lot of times it's better just to have an adult with the kids when you're putting a bunch of kids together, because things do happen. The children do things. And it may be innocent, but it can actually have long-term detrimental impact on both children. So be aware, be smart, and take care. Sometimes it's not that you're avoiding misbehavior, but misunderstandings. I was in a training recently, and one of the women there is like, oh my goodness, in our ministry we have this woman who works overnight, so a lot of us go over and babysit. And I went over to her house, and I'm sitting on the bed. I got in bed with the girls, and I'm reading a Bible story, and should I not be babysitting overnight? But I'm like, okay, one, I will never tell you not to help a sister that needs help with her children. We need to help each other. We need each other's help with our own kids. So, Bible first, love like Jesus. But like, reading a story in bed is a great thing. Maybe you don't crawl under the sheets with them. Maybe you make sure you have that barrier, not to be legalistic. But do you understand the difference in just thinking in a way to create those safety lines to avoid misunderstandings? That if the children go and say, oh, they climbed in, we all got in bed together, it could have been completely innocent, but it also could have been misunderstood. Misunderstood by a child, depending on their age, or misunderstood by an adult. So just to be aware, again, not paranoid, but just smart, and creating these safety boundaries to protect yourself and the children. Communicate a lot, and yes, just knowing that in order to protect our kids, it takes everyone being really vigilant. Any other last questions? The question is, if you designated person to pick up a child, does that designated person have to be an adult? We spelled that out in the policy, and I don't remember if it was 16 or 18. Yeah. I remember discussing this, but I don't remember the answer. I apologize. So, any other questions? Great. I have no watch up here. I have no idea how long I took. So thank you, though. You were all very attentive. I only saw a couple of yawns.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming. It will take us a couple of months. We're still in the final stages of approving these policies. There may be changes, small or significant. We're seeking out all the help we can to make sure they're everything they could possibly be. We're really, really grateful to everything Chandra's done to this point. This today came after countless meetings, countless forums and evaluations and all kinds of things, and lots of work from our own coordinators at all the different levels of youth ministry. So we're really excited that we're at this point, but we're not done. And then as soon as we are done, we're going to spend months and years on kind of figuring out implementation. We'll figure out how to implement it, and then we'll adjust and change how we implement it all the way until we have a policy update 5 or 10 years from now. We'll always be looking for ways to make this better, always be adjusting as our world adjusts. This is really, really important to us as the church, and we know it's really, really important to you. We know the truth is there's probably hundreds of people in the church who care that this meeting is happening, but very few who care to be here about the actual details. Like, they're glad it's happening, but you guys are the ones that care how, and we really greatly appreciate that, that you guys are partnering with us on this. So with that, we're going to end for the day, and thank you for coming. And our board lunch with John and Chandra will begin shortly next door.